Oops, that was my phone. Sorry, everyone.
Good afternoon, everyone coming in. We're just waiting for our audience to arrive, so hang on a couple of ticks. Hi everyone, we're just waiting for our audience to all arrive into the room, so give us a moment. Well, kia ora, tēnā koutou katoa, and welcome everybody. We are starting a couple of minutes early because we have a really huge audience of people that are coming into today's session. So we thought we'd give you all plenty of time to arrive. So I'm going to do a little bit longer intro than I normally would do here to give everyone that moment to settle in. Hopefully you've got your cup of tea or your lunch or your donut and are all ready to go. So my name is Rachel Froggatt. I'm Chief Executive of Women in Sport Aotearoa and Secretary General of the International Working Group on Women in Sport. And I think it's fair to say that ourselves and our partners at the Trans-Tasman Business Circle are ridiculously excited about the guests that we have with us today. So if you are a Kiwi tuning in today, you will absolutely instantaneously recognise this person. And if you're one of our international audiences, too bad we've got her, you can't have her. But we've definitely had this person pretty much in everybody's living rooms for the last 6 to 8 weeks, really breaking down and explaining to us in really simple terms what on earth is going on, what this COVID-19 rubbish is and what we're supposed to do with it. And has been an incredible leader for us across New Zealand, looking after us as we work our way through the lockdown periods and as we approach hopefully what is going to be a move to level 2 next week, which is really significant for New Zealand. We thought it was an amazingly timely opportunity to have this person with us today. So a couple of bits of housekeeping for you. Those of you that have been with us before, you know that actually our moderator only asks questions for about 10 or 12 minutes, and then we actually open the floor because we think it's an amazing opportunity for all of you to ask our guest speaker questions and all those burning things that you've wanted to know. Just get stuck in and ask everything that you can. At the end of the session today, we will have a very short poll. We will be asking you how you're feeling about life generally at the moment. It's just a really interesting bit of insight for us as we go forward. So the last quick housekeeping thing I was going to say is for those of you who are a bit eagle-eyed, you would remember that we were supposed to be staging the captain's lunch today, and it was supposed to be taking place at 1:30 p.m, which is exactly now, in the middle of Auckland, and we were going to have around 400 guests coming together at Eden Park to celebrate women in sport and women in leadership. That event is very much still going ahead, not today, but hopefully we'll be coming back once we move to level 2 and level 1 sometime around October, November, and we hope that everybody here will be coming along to that. So very exciting. So I'm going to hand over to our moderator and also just give you one last little bit. We are going to be making an announcement on Monday about our next 3 weeks of speakers. We've had such a massive reaction to the Leadership from Lockdown series that we are actually going to continue it for a few more weeks. So we've got 3 more speakers lined up, and we'll talk about those on Monday. So without further ado, I'm going to hand across to our amazing moderator who returns again for week 5, Ricky Swinell.
Thank you, Rachel. Hi, everyone, and welcome into some of the newcomers who are joining us for the first time. For those who don't know me, I'm usually very much in the sports vein, so we'll be extending out with our wonderful guest today, who is Associate Professor Siouxsie Wiles. Basically, everybody's Auntie Susie, I think, has become at the moment in New Zealand. Thank you so much. And I guess, first of all, you have spent the last 2 months basically looking after all of us. So how are you?
I'm well, thank you. Yeah, it's been a roller coaster ride for all of us, hasn't it? And I've had really days that have been down in the dumps, and then I've had days where the sun is shining and I'm feeling okay. So yeah, I think just like everybody, we're tired mentally and physically. You know, I've heard this, you know, we're all working from home, and it's like, no, we're not. We're at home in a global emergency trying to do some work, juggling 101 things. And so, yeah, I think every feeling that everybody has is completely legitimate. You know, if you're not coping, that's absolutely normal.
100% for sure. I mean, we've come to know you over the last wee while on our TV screens and in the media, but tell us a little bit about your background. How did you get into science? What was your pathway into microbiology?
Wow. So I am, I'm originally from the UK, but I married a Kiwi, and so I moved here about nearly 11 years ago now. But how did I get into microbiology? So I wasn't a traditional like sciencey kid. I mean, I loved Lego, and I was a swimmer at school. So I grew up in South Africa. My teenage years were in South Africa, and I did a lot of swimming. But then, and we had a pool, and so I swam every day. And then it was funny, when we moved to England, there was no more swimming. And so yeah, what did I get into? I sort of started reading. I was always a big reader. I started reading a lot more stuff. And as a teenager, I guess I had a bit of a doom and gloom period that sort of probably coincided with us leaving South Africa. And I started reading lots of books about death, and I got given this book called The Fireside Book of Deadly Diseases. And it was just fascinating. It was just, tuberculosis, cholera, plague, all of these incredible diseases. And I just was so struck by how these tiny organisms, you know, can wreak havoc both with our bodies and our lives. And you know, I was struck by that book as to how they can change the course of our history, and we're living through that right now. And I guess I never really thought I would actually live through something like this. Yeah, so I got interested in it. I had an amazing biology teacher at school, and so I ended up, and then parents who had left school quite young, and so were very keen for me to go to university, and so I went off to university to do biology. And I absolutely loved, again, going to those lectures and listening about infectious diseases. And so that ended up being what I specialized in. But I still had no real idea of science as a career. So while I was doing my undergraduate degree, that was when my lecturers started to go, oh, you're quite clever, perhaps you could do a PhD. And I had no idea what a PhD was. So like somebody explained it, and then I thought, oh, maybe I could do that. And so I never really knew this was a career until I was kind of in it. And then now I look back and go, oh yeah, okay, so that's what I did. Because I didn't, you know, I was going to be the first person in my family to go to university. What ended up happening was my dad decided he'd go as well, and he ended up beating me by a year. So yeah, so it was a really, you know, I didn't know anything about academia, didn't really know much about, science as a profession, I guess. I didn't really know anybody like that. But it just was about following the thing that I really loved and having the opportunities to follow that's ended up leading me where I am today. It's been amazing, really. Very privileged.
Such an advertisement for the power of reading. Everyone take note, clip this bit off and give it to your kids right now. If we go back to when we first started to hear about this COVID-19 and the seriousness of the situation, can you remember your two parts of your life? What does Siouxsie, the microbiologist, think, but then the private individual think?
Well, I don't think there are two bits of me. I'm always a microbiologist. So I spent Christmas in the UK. So my daughter and I went over. We left my husband behind. He didn't want to come to the cold, so we went off and we spent a month hanging out with friends and family. And we came back to New Zealand via Hong Kong, actually, just as things were kicking off. So kind of mid-January. And I sort of got home, and a few days later got my first call saying, can you come onto Breakfast TV and talk about this virus? And so I was like, I sort of heard about this, and I started doing some reading, and it was like, okay, there's this thing that's happening, kind of looks a bit scary, but there's no reason for panic at the moment. I mean, not that there's my thing, I guess the way that I have tried to talk to people about this is that when you panic, you don't act in your best interest or in anybody's best interest. So it's always been, how concerned am I about this, but please don't panic type thing. So in mid-January, it was like, this is kind of interesting, but at the moment, there's nothing that would ring huge alert bells. And then about 2 weeks later, I went back on breakfast and it was like, wow, this is escalating fast. And it's been so interesting because lots of people have really struggled with that. I've had emails from people going, but you said it was going to be okay. And I was like, well, my job as a scientist is to look at what the evidence is and then change my opinion as the evidence changes. And, what everybody is watching is how science happens, like in fast forward almost, that we, as more stuff comes in, we can go, yeah, okay, now we're quite scared. Yeah.
In that sense then, I mean, you've been such an authoritative voice and you've taken that on right from the start. So were you prepared to take on that role as you realised this was escalating?
Yeah, so I guess the important thing to say is that this is not my first rodeo. So as a microbiologist, so I've been here, as I say, nearly 11 years now, and I've always had an interest in sort of science communication. And part of that is because my job as a publicly funded scientist, I believe, is to make sure that people know, what I do, that I can justify what I do, but also that if my skills are necessary and needed, that I will step up and, explain stuff. So I have, so it started about 10 years ago when there was a big outbreak of food poisoning in Germany. And so I ended up doing my very first interview about that. I got called Siouxsie on live TV, which was quite funny. Then I've done Ebola, I've done Zika, I did the Fonterra botulism scare. So basically over the last 10 years, I have developed the skills that are needed that when a microbiology type story and infectious diseases stories in the news, I can explain it to everybody that needs to understand what's going on. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was probably one of the first reasons why I got that call going, okay, there's this thing. And it just, I guess I had no idea that it would end up becoming my life. So I have basically had to put my real job aside and focus on this. And it was because I made a conscious decision that this was more important at the moment for me to focus my attention on, because it's changing so fast and it has had such a huge consequences for all of us, that I really felt it was important for me to step up so that to explain why we were being asked to do the things that we were going to be asked to do, so that people really understood what was needed of us all. Because the premise is right. This has been New Zealand has been a team of 5 million, right? I mean, this is how we respond to this virus is all about us working individually for the collective. And so that was just something that was kind of, I never even thought for a minute that I wouldn't do it, because I knew that I had, this is my area of expertise. And I spent the last 10 years kind of learning how to talk to people, responding to journalist questions, doing all sorts of things and thinking, okay, yeah. So in many respects, I feel like I've been training for this for 10 years. And then this is the moment where it's needed. And I had no idea this is what I was actually training for, I guess.
But you, correct me if I'm wrong, you'd largely do this, all this media stuff you're doing basically unpaid, out of the goodness of your heart, to get that message across and help New Zealanders.
Yes, I mean, I guess so. I mean, you know, again, as a university academic, I have a portion of my time that is supposed to be spent in what we call service. And so that is sort of like, that is service to my community and in my scientific community. So there's things that I do, like I'm a journal editor and all of these sorts of things. But I consider this communication part of that service. So it's just gone from a small portion of my job to being, actually, no, I just need to do this all the time. And you know, it's been, it's just been amazing. I guess the other thing that happened, so I don't even know how long ago now, it feels like forever, but so I've always been, I've worked with animators and cartoonists and all sorts of things before in the past to sort of communicate stuff about microbiology. And so I was writing a lot and, you know, responding to journalists' queries and things. And something came up where I thought a visual aid would be really useful. And so this basically started a relationship with the cartoonist from the Spinoff called Toby Morris. And now Toby and I just sort of working together on all sorts of things. It'll be like, hey, we need to learn, you know, I think people need to know about this. Let's figure out how we can communicate that. And so I'll do sort of some written piece, and together Toby and I will figure out, you know, he brings the how do you make that visual. And it's just been the most amazing thing to see those graphics that we've made go all around the world. There are people online who are translating them into every language. And I get emails all the time going, oh, we're using your thing, and it's, you know, and it's saving lives. And it's sort of, it's quite overwhelming actually that we kind of get together, put our heads together and go, okay, this is the important thing. And then the next thing you know, somebody in, I'm trying to think, somebody in Turkey is like, yep, and here it is in Turkish. And it's like, wow.
So cool, so cool.
Yeah,
and amazing. That though, I mean, it's put you in the eye of the storm a little bit, and I can read your out of office message that you have on. Is if you're emailing to tell me you don't agree with me and you do so in an unkind and threatening way, then please take some time to think about why you thought it appropriate to email me. That's just the small version. And I think particularly for a lot of the women who are on here who are in public positions, we've been on the end of that. How have you coped with the inevitable keyboard warriors, the trolls, and those kind of people?
Well, I have days where I don't cope.
Yeah.
And then I have days where I pull on my big girl pants and I'm like, got to do this, right? Because I know they're a minority. So for me, it's taken all sorts of forms. So it's been people who people who don't have the same value set as me. And so they're like, you're making these decisions and we don't like them, and you're making this advice and we don't like it. And so they're kind of very firmly going, this is not, you know, we don't like you and we don't like what you stand for. And then there's been people who, so one big thing has been about mask wearing. And so there are people who are really vehemently like, we all need to be wearing masks all the time. And so they have started threatening me about that because I haven't stepped up and said, yes, you're right, everyone should wear a mask. Because it's actually a bit more, I mean, it's more complicated than that. This is the problem with stuff like this. And that actually culminated in somebody making an official complaint to the university about me. So there's been kind of that stuff going on. I'm almost tempted to show you the email that I just got before I turned this on, but it's a bit, I mean, it's very short and succinct. So do you want to see it?
Go on.
See if you can read that. Can you read that?
Oh, go back. Oh, yes. I hope everyone can see that. Yeah.
That was today's email.
Lovely.
Short and sweet. I don't know what I've done to upset him, but yeah. So, I mean, it is astonishing how much more this, you know, women get this. You know, there are lots of men who step up and they don't get this kind of abuse. But I just have to remind myself, of course, that I'm getting lots of emails, lovely emails from people going, you know, we just love seeing you out there, and just also people who say, you know, you're inspiring me to do science, or you're inspiring me to step up and sort of, you know, stand up for what I believe in. And so, yeah, as I say, I just have to put my big girl pants on, and I often have a little bit of a cry, but
Don't we all? For those who couldn't see and they did ask what was on the email, it just simply said one word, idiot, which we know.
Oh, that was the subject line. The idiot was the subject line. Yeah.
I couldn't see what the other word under was. but if it's not readable, but anyway, I think we get the gist of that charming fellow's.
He called me some nasty names.
Yeah. we'll move on. We'll look, and I know we're just starting to get conscious of time already. We'll look at some of the sports stuff, and specifically, obviously, at level 3, we saw golf and tennis come back, and now the changes are going to come at level 2. So what does that mean for sport? It's going to open things up a little bit more, but how can our sports facilities, organisations be really ready for what's coming over the next wee while?
Yeah, so I guess so level 2 is all about the kind of keep it safe, and my hope would be that we could be at level 2 for a fairly short period of time. If we are basically really confident the virus is eliminated here, we could move out of that. So it is going to be just about how can you do things as safely as possible so that if there was a little mini outbreak, it could be squashed as soon as possible. And so that will be, again, about kind of being in bubbles, about keeping those as small as possible, and knowing who everybody is and who they're having contact with. Because the thing that has been most difficult about this virus is the fact that people are infectious for a few days before they develop symptoms. And some people develop really mild symptoms that they kind of just go, oh, well, that's not really it, that's something else, right? And so it's so crucial, because when you don't know that you're infectious, you know, depending on what you do and how much contact you have with somebody or lots of people, you could spread it quite far. So it's all going to be about, so for example, teams, well, if you're going to start training together, you know, can you do it in bubbles? Can you say, okay, well, these are the people who are going to stay together? You know, you can make those bigger, but frankly, the bigger they are, the more risk there is. And then obviously if people within that training bubble are all going off and then having, you know, doing other things with other people, you know, you can see that something that's maybe 50 people big suddenly becomes 500, right? Which becomes much more difficult to manage. I mean, it's also going to be all about these, so maintaining the hand washing and all of the kind of cleaning of things. So again, shared surfaces, what is your sport? Where are you working out, or where are you training, where are you playing, and what does it require? Does it require people to be using the same stuff? Because if they can't be cleaned, then that's going to be tricky, right? So and there are ways of doing things, but it just might require a bit of you know, thinking or getting the right kind of kit to make sure that things can be cleaned and sanitized between people. But yeah, it really is about we just don't, you know, we want to be rid of this virus here, right? We want to be getting back to some kind of semblance of normal. And so my guess, I just want to urge everyone to realize it's so important that we do this sort of slowly. Because if we don't, and we see cases come back, then we are basically back where we started. And it doesn't have to be that way. And it's just because, you know, because people are infectious before they know it, and also because there's an incubation period. So it takes sort of 2 to 10 days for somebody to come down with the virus. And that means that, you know, what happens, you know, if we see a case today, it's something that reflects what happened a couple of weeks ago. And so we're always running behind. It's like basically chasing something, you know, from meters apart with blindfold on. You know, so we're always trying to play catch up. And that's why it's our job to try and do the best we can to minimize the chances of it coming back. Because in Australia, you know, there's now in Melbourne, they've got another big cluster that's just kind of exploded, and it's had like 49 cases in the last few days just in one workplace. And so those are people who got infected within the last 2 weeks. So how far is that already spread before you even realize it's spread? So yeah, play it safe, because the more we do that, the quicker we can move out of these restrictions too.
On that, and this is quite a specific question that I think has implications for our sports teams and the facilities, and it's the time frame of being exposed to COVID-19 and testing positive. So if you're exposed to somebody who has the virus, should you be tested within 24 hours, or do you actually need to wait a couple of days?
You possibly need to wait up to 10 days. I mean, that's what's really difficult, because depending on who you are, you might be in, you know, you might be in the 2-day incubation period, or you might be in the 10-day incubation period. So over that time, the virus will start to do its thing. And then the question is, at what stage do you become, you know, detectable? So there may well end up being a scenario where there's an easy test that could be done every day. You know, what you're watching is science on steroids, right? I mean, what we are watching is a virus we've never seen before that has emerged, and we now know like huge amounts about it. I mean, still not as much as we'd like to know, but compared to not knowing anything, in the space of 4 months or 5 months, we've gone from nothing to actual clinical trials and diagnostics and drugs and all sorts of things. So the how the test has evolved over that time is changed. And there are lots of, so at the moment it is you need one of these horrible nasal swabs and that goes off to a lab. But there are a few companies who are starting to release, basically what we call point of care. So tests that can be done like by you at home. They're not fantastic yet, but in the next couple of months, we could have something that everybody could test themselves every few days if that was actually important for your business. So it's not the problem with the kind of exposure thing is it usually takes time for you to realize you've been exposed. And it's not just a case of, the next day I'll go and get tested, because that will be too early to really tell anything. But then the problem is when you wait for symptoms, it's kind of too late. So it's really complicated. But as I say, it may well be that these tests kind of come online at some point, because obviously this is a big thing everywhere. And so those tests are being kind of pushed, the scientists are working incredibly hard to try and develop these things. The question is, how reliable are they, and whether they're going to pick, whether you end up with a false sense of security because you test negative and then you're like, I'm fine, whereas actually you might just be the day before, sort of thing. So that's what sort of makes this all so tricky. And I do feel like everybody's learning so much more about how science works.
Sure. All I know is that I 100% do not even want to have one of those swabs jammed up my nose. So,
the great thing now is that so there's just been a couple of papers released showing actually that you can potentially do it from sputum and spit. So it may well be that early in the morning when you're a bit kind of you can it took about half a cup's worth of spit, but that may well be the way to do it. So it could become a morning, okay, I'll get tested. But for most of us, what we're aiming for in New Zealand is to not have that be a reality, right?
Sure. I'll get to some of the questions that are coming in here. This is very sports specific, but do you think that it was the right decision to let the Warriors join the NRL this season, given the border closures? And I guess that's probably seen as one rule for that sport and something different for everybody else.
Yeah, there have been that, haven't there? There's been lots of rules for some people and not for others. I guess they're not going to be coming back though, right? They've gone to train?
As it stands, and at this stage, they won't come back unless...
Yeah, until there's a trans-Tasman bubble, there are going to be restrictions on people's travel. So they've gone. I guess people can still go away, but when you come back, you have to be quarantined, right? So what they've done, though, essentially, as a team, is potentially put themselves at risk, depending on where they've gone and what's happening there. I'm not quite sure. As I say, in Melbourne, there's now a splurge of cases. So it's not the kind of thing that I would be recommending any team do. We're in this for the long haul, right? I know that everybody's really keen for us to get back to normal. There is no normal after this. We're going to be in a really different world. And the question is, how are we going to work through that? And so trying to, it's so hard. It's so hard.
How does the university support you in the communications, and do you feel that the university is doing enough to look after yourself and colleagues who are at the front and centre of this?
Oh, can I have a no comment?
I wonder if that's
enough of a comment.
Yes.
No, that's mean. So I've got some incredibly supportive colleagues, and I'm kind of in a weird position where I'm kind of between two faculties, one of which some colleagues are not particularly supportive, and then the others of which are just like awesome people. So I remember in those early days, I had colleagues who were sending me flowers and cakes and all sorts of things, and yet I'd never heard anything from any of my bosses. So it's just been a weird thing where I have, again, like everything, you have people who don't value what you do, and then you have people you do. So I have lots of people who are looking after me, and I wouldn't have been able to do this without them. But it's been really interesting to watch who has said nothing.
Oh yes, I hear you. Yeah. What would be, I guess, your top 3 messages to sports organisers, and this is across the spectrum, who are trying to get their competitions ready, how to communicate these messages to their sports communities?
I guess my first message is, I know this is hard, but we have to take it slow. So please, I guess my big plea is, in New Zealand and Australia is the same, like sports people are heroes to everybody. You are role models to everybody. And so when you break the rules, you show that it's okay to break the rules, right? I mean, we've seen this with people going off and training, going, didn't really mean to. It's like, it matters. And so what I want to see from sports is real leadership. That is kind of, we are going to follow the rules, and we're not going to pressure to do things to move before we're ready, that we're going to trust the science and the health experts, that they have our best interests at heart. And we're going to do what we're asked to do. And so that is for the next little while to play it safe, to be not pressuring to open up and do things that the health people are saying, please don't, because when you start pressuring, then everybody else is going, well, why can't we do it, right? And then it all just falls apart, because this is so important that we remain that cohesive team, which again, as sports people, right? So you can teach us how to do that well. So I think it's just, be thinking about, what does this look like? What are the risks for depending on what your sport is? How do people interact with each other? How can you do physical distancing if that's possible? If you can't, what does that look like? How would you minimize the number of people who are together in case something happened? And think about that in a sort of worst case scenario. I think it's also really clear that it's going to be a long time before people feel confident about being in crowds again. So, the other thing we've learned from this is we can do things really differently, right? I mean, how many more people will be willing to work from home now? Not every day, but some days. I've loved going to gigs in my pajamas, right? Because bands have played from their bubbles. So I think we need to get creative as well. Because actually the other thing that being at home has taught a lot of us is that it's more accessible sometimes for, people who couldn't normally get to a venue might suddenly now have access because they can watch things and stuff. So I think don't move too fast to want to open things up, especially to the public, because that is a big risk. And I ask you to show leadership in this space, to basically say, we're going to follow the scientists and the health experts, because this is their turf, right? And that they are trying to act in everybody's best interests. And when people that the public really value start to push, then then people stop listening to us.
Yeah, I guess it's all those same messages, and the hand hygiene, the sneezing into the none of those things change just because the things are getting looser. There's a question here. There's been an opinion that the virus has a 70-day life cycle and peaks at about 40 to 45. Have you got an opinion on this?
That doesn't match with anything I've seen. One of the tricky things is that people test positive for a long time after they have basically finished having symptoms. And so the worry at first was, well, does this mean that they still have the virus? But the test for the virus itself is not able to differentiate between viable infectious virus and bits of gunky virus that your body is destroyed. And so in South Korea, they've basically been following hundreds of people who've still been testing positive, and they have not been able to get a single live virus out of those tests. So we think it's because the test is just picking up the bits of crud that your body's been dealing with. So yeah, and there was another really good study that actually looked at when people were infectious. And again, they showed that if people only had contact with somebody who had the virus, after they had the virus, after they had symptoms for 6 days, none of those people got infected. So it really, that sounds like absolute nonsense to me.
What we're probably going to see in the next wee while is sports events behind closed doors. And the question is do you think that is realistic, even without a crowd, still considering the number of people that it does take to manage an event in a stadium, in addition to all the people who are participating or broadcasting and all of that?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess it needs to be kept as small as possible, right? So what is the minimum number of people you can get away with? And again, doing it in teams and bubbles. So can you, rather than everybody has to come into contact with everybody else, how can you make sure that people are only coming into close contact with smaller groups of people? I think it is completely, it is manageable. And it is just also about knowing who has contacted with who. So if teams are interacting, then knowing exactly when that was and who they were will help with contact tracing if that's needed.
Yeah, because I guess, and this follows on a little bit, we're going to see contact sport resuming. So rather large burly men putting their heads in places they have to for their sport, which is a big jump from level 3. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, there is an inherent risk in all this contact. And so I guess it's about balancing so what is the risk of getting the virus, and you know, given we're on this elimination path, we would hope that risk would be very low, versus what are the consequences for those particular people. And so we would hope that it would be low consequences. But I guess the thing that we are learning now about this virus, because there have been so many people infected, is that there can be severe consequences for people that you wouldn't have expected. But these are very rare events. So we haven't seen them in New Zealand, but for example, there's been some papers just published about so doctors in New York, but I think also in Italy and maybe in the Netherlands, who have seen young, 30s to 40s, perfectly healthy people suddenly have strokes, really severe strokes. And these people have all tested positive for COVID-19. They were basically at home with a mild infection, and then suddenly, you know, a few weeks later, they suddenly have a stroke. So this is why we don't want it here, right? It's why we went down the elimination path, because we didn't know what the long-term consequences or what the rare consequences were. And so that's why kind of balancing these things is really important. You know, if it is going to be this sort of contact, then again, it's all about how can you minimize the number of people you have that contact with. So this may well be changing schedules of games, actually. So, you know, if it's, I'm sorry, I'm a scientist, I'm pretty bloody bad at sport, but like, how many people are in a team? So how many people would, if you were playing another team, how many people would that be like doing that physical contact?
So for rugby, you've got 30 on the field plus another, so squads of 23 basically.
Okay.
Netball, you're looking at squads of 12. So for the
so netball would be better than rugby because it's a smaller number of people, obviously, yeah. But so, you know, 23, so that's 46 people.
It's just the play.
Potentially having this close contact. So if they have a game and then a week later have another game, that's, so they've had, you know, they've had contact with 23 then, and they've had contact with another 23 who have maybe had contact with another 23, and then it just becomes completely unmanageable. So it may well end up being that thinking about the fixtures and how you can make sure that there are sufficient gaps, that if there is an outbreak, it doesn't wipe through the entire league or whatever it is. You know, those are going to be the really important things to think about.
A slight change of tack. How have you stayed so positive and sane through this? Through the ups and downs and the good days and the bad days and the horrible emails and things?
It's partly where we are. So it's partly we are in a country that is doing elimination and doing it really well. That's been, well, we hope really well, and we don't quite know how good level 3 has been yet. We'll find that out in a few days' time. But because it's been really hard. So as I say, I'm from the UK. My parents are in the UK. My mum is somebody who got a letter from the NHS to say she was a vulnerable person, and so she had to stay home for the next few months, you know. And so when Boris Johnson said, you know, this is our strategy, and his very words were, every family should expect to lose loved ones before their time, I cried that day. I was like, oh my God. So I was trying to maintain this positive, hey, we shouldn't panic and we should work together, while really worried about my mum and dad. I'm still worried about my mum and dad. I mean, they're being very sensible, but yeah, so I guess just knowing that I have to be positive, and that I have to, that I have a job to do. And if I fall apart, I can't do that job. So that has been one of the things that has kept me going. And I've got an amazing supportive little bubble. You know, my husband and my daughter, and I have 2 cats. Not that they're particularly supportive, but you know, so I couldn't do what I do if it wasn't for the people around me who were lifting me up and you know, and wiping the tears away when they come, and feeding me chocolate cake and doing those kinds of things. So because all of us, you know, we're not little islands, we are social beings, and we do need these people to support us. So that's kind of how I've done it. But it has been knowing that I have a job to do, and it was an important job, because I've also had I've had journalists who've called up to talk about something, and they've just said, oh, I just wanted to hear your voice. And you've made me feel really calm already.
Oh, that's very sweet.
So there's also been something I think about the decision to do, to try and show the human me, and that I am worried, but I don't want us to panic. But something about that has calmed people and helped them kind of get through it. And so I'm, immensely grateful, privileged to have had that role. I'm really glad it's helped some people. It's obviously made some people a bit cross, but I can cope with that.
This is a different question, and it's an important one. I think 1 in 4 New Zealanders identify as disabled. Many have underlying health conditions which may or may not put them at greater risk of COVID. So how do we ensure these members of our community aren't marginalised further by this virus, and by, I guess, other people's perception of what they think a disabled person can or can't do?
And this is one of the underlying reasons why I was so against the kind of so-called Plan B. The idea that we could just isolate anybody who was supposedly vulnerable for the foreseeable future. I mean, it's so offensive on so many different levels. I meit is assuming that anybody, it's assuming A, that you can do it, which Sweden has shown you can't. It's completely misunderstanding, who is vulnerable, how many of those people we have in New Zealand. You say it's a lot of people, but it's even assuming that those people are not fulfilling incredible lives right now. So that was why I was so grateful that we went down this path, rather than the sort of the idea that we would just slow it down so it didn't overwhelm our health system. It's like, no, we don't want anyone to get sick, because that's just, it's horrible. And I still struggle with this, because people are still sending me, oh, the death rate looks like so-and-so. Are you going to apologize that we overreacted? It's just like any death rate is, anyway, don't get me started. I don't understand this. And I think the vast majority of New Zealanders, or the people who support these sort of things, I don't think they even realize who it is, I'm reminded of a line from the movie Shrek. So Lord Farquaad is basically sending out his people to go and do some stuff, and he says, many of you will die, but that is the sacrifice I am willing to make. And I'm just like, that's kind of, in some respects, that's how people have been acting, and it's so offensive.
Yeah, for sure. On vaccine situation, what are your views on the vaccine? Will they be effective, or is this going to be part of our lives? And then there's sort of a second question about it, the possibility of the virus dying out on a global scale. Okay, so from what I can remember, there were about 30 odd different potential vaccines in various stages of development. I can't imagine that one of them wouldn't be successful, but who knows? We're just going to have to watch the space. Viruses are much easier to make vaccines for than bacteria, so that makes me hopeful. And the fact that there is so much going on in the space makes me hopeful. The really important thing is going to be that it isn't rushed, so that we don't get something that doesn't work, or that is actually dangerous. And that when something is developed, that it is available, that it is not out of the price range of everybody. And so the other thing that people are watching now is also, there's been some really horrendous stuff happening, just showing what happens when you make health a for-profit business. And it just shouldn't be like that. So those are the things that I'm more worried about, is not whether one will be developed, but whether it will be equitably released and available to everybody who needs it. I'm conscious of time because Sharon's popped up, which means we're just about running out of time. So there's just a couple, I guess, quick around sports and facilities, because a lot of our sports facilities are older. They've got, old public loos and no drying facilities, things like that. And obviously equipment, how long the virus lasts on that. So what would you advise it to be really important for community sports who might have limited funds to make things safe enough? Is there safe? Yes, safe enough. Again,
our aim is to not have the virus around, so that's what we're going for, in which case it will be very safe to do stuff. Washing hands is going to be the important thing, and disinfecting surfaces and things like that. So the virus stays on kind of plastics and metals for probably about 3 days, But, you know, can be really easily got rid of through disinfectants and things like that. So it's going to be the thing that's really boring, which is the cleaning and stuff. But, you know, isn't that interesting that what this virus, what this pandemic has shown us is who are the essential workers? The essential workers are the cleaners. They are the people, you know, working in supermarkets. And so I would also hope that what we come out of this where there's a really new sense of who is valuable in our society and that we should pay them accordingly.
And just quickly, would that be the same on like a netball or a basketball or a rugby ball? It's a slightly different kind of surface, I guess, or material?
Yeah, so not clear. I mean, those, so I think cardboard was probably the closest thing to it, which I think was 24 hours, but it certainly didn't look like it would be more than that kind of time. I mean, plastic, I guess some balls are sort of plasticky, aren't they? So probably 3 days. But again, really easy to just give a disinfectant over after everybody's done it, or have them all balls in quarantine, stick them in quarantine for 3 days.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm so sorry, everybody. I see so many great questions there that I haven't had a chance to get to, but thank you, Dr. Siouxsie, for everything. And I'll hand back over to Sharon and then we'll get a few final thoughts from you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ricky. And yes, thank you, Siouxsie. You are so cool. It was so neat to have you with us today. I loved it. And we've had amazing feedback already coming through. I'll formally thank you in a moment, but for those of you who are regulars with us, you'll see the poll coming up in front of you. And if you wouldn't mind answering those questions, and we'll give you the results at the end. But yes, Siouxsie, thank you so much. You covered so much about your personal journey through this, which is fascinating in itself. The virus itself, sports, you know, acknowledging that you don't know a lot about sports, so you did really well on that. So thank you so much. Ricky, always a pleasure to have you with us as well. Again, brilliant to have you back this week. And I wanted to thank Rachel and the team at Women in Sport Aotearoa for bringing this series to us. So thank you to those of you who have answered the poll. They are up in front of you now. So excellent. Most of us are still feeling innovative. Brilliant. 95% of us believe the government is doing a good job. For the planning, most of us think 12 months is an estimate of when this will be over, and 61% thinking that women and girls will have a part to play in business recovery, which is amazing. So thank you so much again to everyone for joining us. And Siouxsie, I'll hand over to you for the closing comments.
Yes, gosh, what can I say? I certainly never thought that I would be living through a global pandemic, as I think many of us didn't. So I think just take the time to pat yourselves on the back for how you've done, regardless of how that is. You know, if all you need to do is sit and watch Netflix and eat popcorn, that's absolutely fine. I mean, however you're behaving in this is kind of okay for you. And we will get through this, but we need to take it slowly. And as sports people, you know, and as people in this industry, people like me are relying on you to help show that the science is important and that we follow the science and follow the health. So thank you very much for your contributions.
Thank you.